Racist cops rip up black woman's dress in public some months later. They're begging the mayor for mercy. There are moments so seemingly peaceful that time itself feels suspended, until a brutal hand rips through that veil of serenity and turns it into a broad, daylight nightmare. A quiet park, a black woman reading beneath the shade of a tree, and an act the nation would never forget. Before we dive deep into this story, tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. That afternoon, at Jefferson Park, not far from downtown Atlanta, the late-day sunlight streamed through drooping willow branches, casting honeyed streaks across the ground. Beneath an ancient tree over 90 years old, Kerenza Blake, 27, sat quietly on a time-worn stone bench. In her hands was a softcover copy of Beloved, the classic novel by Toni Morrison, its pages dog-eared as if they'd been pored over at least a dozen times. The yellow dress she wore, light as morning mist, soft as memory, was a birthday gift from her father, Mayor Knox Blake, just 3 weeks earlier. That yellow was not just sunlight's hue, it was a symbol of independence, self-possession, and the pride passed down through generations of black women. To Kerenza, the dress wasn't just fabric. It was a statement of presence in a world that constantly tries to erase people like her. Jefferson Park had once been a derelict plot of land in the heart of the city. Her father, back when he served as a district councilman, had fought to revive it into a civic space, equipped with public Wi-Fi, solar-powered lights, and a 2.3-mile walking path circling a lake. For Kerenza, this wasn't just a place to unwind. It was a space of memory, a spiritual backyard where she returned to escape press briefings, TV debates, and the endless glow of political life. She assumed that afternoon would be as quiet as all the others. But then, the sound of shoes striking gravel sliced through the calm like a blade. From the trailhead leading into the park, 2 figures in blue appeared. One was a middle-aged man with a heavy frame, carrying himself like he owned the park. His name tag read, Felix Maddox, 45 years old, a veteran cop with 21 years on the force, and at least 3 allegations of harassment toward black women, all handled internally. Behind him was Linus Davidson, 26, still fumbling with his utility belt, his eyes wide and uncertain, like someone too afraid to challenge what's wrong. When Maddox's eyes landed on Kerenza, the air changed instantly. He let out a slanted smile, openly lewd and unapologetic. "That dress," he said loudly, dragging his voice out to catch attention, "needs a thorough investigation, miss." The words hit like a slap across the tranquil air. A small dog nearby barked sharply. A couple just a few steps away turned their heads. Kerenza didn't respond with fear. She gently closed her book and placed it on the bench beside her. Her posture remained composed, but her gaze sharpened into a state of alert. This wasn't the first time she'd been harassed, but something was different about the presence of these 2 men. "What do you need from me?" she asked, her voice calm but each word ringing clear like a silver bell. No reply, just the sound of Maddox chuckling with disdain. And then, as if it were an action repeated 1,000 times, he stepped forward, pulled his baton from his belt, and abruptly ducked to flip her dress up with its cold, metallic tip. Less than a second, but more than enough to expose an entire society. More than enough to turn a woman into a target, and a park into a crime scene. Behind Maddox, Davidson was no longer laughing, but he didn't intervene. And that, more than anything, was what truly froze Kerenza's blood. One action, one look, one dress, and an entire system shattered. The lifting of the dress was not merely a physical violation. It was a cold message from a system long accustomed to impunity. With the metal tip of his baton, Felix Maddox didn't just raise a layer of fabric, he trampled on the dignity, autonomy, and most basic safety of a woman. and he did it with the satisfied grin of a man who believed the badge on his chest was a license to humiliate. Kerenza screamed. The sound wasn't just reflex. It was the distilled anguish of centuries pressed into the body of a black woman. She yanked her dress down, her arm trembling with shame, but her eyes burned bright like a blade. She didn't cry. She didn't flee. She didn't fall. She stared directly at Maddox, not as a victim, but as a living indictment. Behind Maddox, Linus Davidson let out a short, awkward laugh, half fear, half uncertainty. But it died instantly when an old man, about 70, walking a dog with a cane, froze nearby, his face stretching in shock. His eyes didn't leave Kerenza. The entire park, in that moment, seemed to freeze. No one there knew Kerenza was the daughter of Mayor Knox Blake, the man who had just won re-election with over 61% of the vote, the man who had spoken passionately about justice, police reform, and the rights of black women. But to Maddox and Davidson, she was just a black woman sitting alone, and that, in their eyes, meant vulnerability, weakness, and insignificance. Kerenza didn't need to shout her identity to demand respect. She simply pulled out her phone, her hand still trembling, but her gaze ablaze, and said softly, like a slow declaration, "I'm calling my father." Maddox burst out laughing, his voice dripping with mockery. "Go ahead. Call Obama while you're at it. We're on duty." Davidson suddenly looked around, sensing a shift. The wind was picking up, carrying whispers from the walking paths. In the distance, a young Latino man, about 19, riding his bike down a trail, had stopped and raised his phone. He murmured into the camera, "Guys, I'm live streaming. A white cop just... Oh God." The sound of Facebook Live drifted with the wind. It was no longer a private matter. Kerenza pressed the phone to her ear, her heart pounding like a war drum. When the line picked up, Knox Blake's voice came through. Not rushed, but waited. "Kerenza, are you all right?" She answered without preamble, without explanation. "I was just violated, right in Jefferson Park. Someone filmed it." There was no scream, no wailing, just a terrifying calm. But anyone who saw her face in that moment, pale from shock, but her chin held defiantly high, would understand that the yellow dress had changed color. It was no longer just a keepsake from her father, no longer soft summer cloth. Now it was armor, a shield beneath contemptuous eyes, a symbol of a warning that said, "I will not be silent." Felix Maddox stood there, still laughing. Davidson began to step back. The elderly man had not moved, his grip on the cane tightening. No one knew that in that very moment, the city of Atlanta was about to witness a reckoning. Not through violence, but through a gaze, a voice, and a phone glowing in the hand of a woman who had just been violated. The silence in that park was not the end. It was the beginning of a storm. Less than 10 minutes after Kerenza called her father, the air in the park was still thick, like a block of stone yet to crack. The birds had stopped singing. The wind hesitated through the trees. And then, from the gravel path, 2 figures appeared again. They weren't supporting officers. They weren't there to apologize. It was Felix Maddox and Linus Davidson, returning, like 2 lost predators who still believed they ruled the forest. Felix Maddox, in a uniform still marked with dirt at the hems, walked with heavy steps, carrying a swagger he didn't bother to hide. His baton swung at his side like a warning. In his hands, the law was something that could be twisted at will. Linus Davidson followed behind, no longer looking naive. His face was pale now, eyes darting constantly, his back slightly hunched like someone trying to hide from a gaze, or his conscience. Maddox spoke first, voice dripping with disdain and challenge. "You think just 'cause you're the mayor's daughter, You can sit wherever you want. This park doesn't belong to you." That sentence, instead of calming the tension, poured gasoline on the simmering fire among the crowd that had begun to gather. By now, more than 20 people stood around the park. Not an organized protest, no signs, just ordinary citizens. A young mother holding her child, a college student with a GoPro strapped to his chest, an old man with a cane, and a few joggers who had stopped because something wrong was unfolding in broad daylight. Kerenza didn't back down. Her hand still gripped the phone, thumb already pressed to the record button. In her eyes, there was no fear, only a silent determination that men like Maddox had never learned how to face. She replied, her voice steady, each word ringing clear. "I've recorded every word, every gesture, every condescending glance. And I'm still recording." Davidson glanced at the glowing phone screen, then quietly stepped back. Maddox smirked, but this time the smile faltered. Still, he let out a sentence that made those around nearly gasp in fury. "You're just a lucky little black girl. Don't think a pretty dress and a daddy in office make you somebody." Kerenza didn't retreat, didn't flinch. She turned fully to face him and spoke loudly, not just to him, but to everyone present. "They stripped me with their power. Now they've come back to intimidate me. Look at this, everyone. This is the Atlanta police. This is how they treat someone like me." A man in his 60s, wearing a faded blue shirt, shot up from a nearby bench and shouted, "I saw everything! From the beginning! Don't say no one saw it! I got it on video!" Maddox's face twitched. Davidson swallowed hard, fingers tightening on his utility belt. Phones began to rise higher. Screens lit up. A young woman live-streamed on Instagram with the caption flashing, "Police harassment, Jefferson Park. It's happening now." The park, once a peaceful haven, had become a public courtroom. But there were no judges, no lawyers. Because today, daylight was the witness. Evidence came from the cameras in the hands of citizens. And the victim, Kerenza, was no longer just a girl who had been violated. She was the living symbol of a truth buried for far too long. She stepped forward, sunlight catching her shoulders, her eyes locked on Maddox, who now could only strain to hold on to a confidence that was rapidly dissolving. "Everyone is watching," she said, "and today, you won't get away." And just then, a siren wailed in the distance. But it wasn't the sound of rescue. It was the sound of a system cracking. A system beginning to realize, when justice is ignored for too long, the public becomes the judge. No one is ever scheduled to become a witness to history. They just happen to be there, holding a cup of coffee, walking their dog, heading home. But at the right moment, in the right place, with right and wrong laid bare, it becomes impossible to look away. Jefferson Park was no longer just a park on a Tuesday afternoon. It had turned into a plaza of truth. A woman in navy scrubs, a stethoscope still dangling from her neck, stopped her jog, panting. She stepped forward, pointed at Maddox, and said firmly, "I saw it." He used his baton to lift her dress. "That's sexual assault. I'm a nurse. I know what that is." Almost at the same time, a woman in a charcoal gray suit, her hair neatly tied back, emerged from the crowd. A folder still clutched in one hand, she walked quickly toward Kerenza, speaking low but loud enough for the crowd to hear. "I'm a criminal attorney. My name is Erica Vaughn. If you want, I'll testify. I was standing right here. I saw everything. This is a crime, not a misunderstanding." The sounds began rising from undefined corners, like a wave from the earth's core, like the echo of justice compressed too long. "Shame! Take their badges! Protect her! Now! Don't let them walk!" Maddox kept his smug expression, but his jaw clenched noticeably. Davidson whispered, stepping back like he wished to disappear into the crowd. We messed up, Felix. That sentence reached Kerenza's ears like a first confession. But it didn't satisfy her, because here, truth didn't need whispers. It needed to be shouted. A young Latino boy, around 17, stood on a stone bench, holding his phone high. "It's going live on TikTok. Facebook, too. Over 6,000 people are watching." A group of friends around him shouted, "Tag Channel 5, call CNN, too." Each raised phone was no longer just a recording device. It was a vote, a beacon, a weapon turned against the badge. Those lenses didn't just reflect, they etched into the memory of social media, into the timeline of a city that had long slumbered through injustice. Felix Maddox screamed, his voice slicing through his teeth like a trapped animal. "Disperse immediately. This is an active investigation. You're obstructing law enforcement." No one moved. No one feared. Because everyone knew the one violating the law was the man in uniform. Kerenza turned, facing the now nearly 50 people in the crowd, her voice rising. "If they can do this to me, in broad daylight, in a public park, when I have a phone, have evidence, then imagine what they've done to the girls without a mayor for a father, without live stream cameras, without witnesses." Those words struck like a spark on a leaking tank of rage. A group of students from Georgia State University appeared at the edge of the park, all wearing yellow dresses, identical to the one Kerenza wore. They held no signs, needed no microphones. Their silence thundered louder than any megaphone. "We know who you are, and we stand with you." Felix Maddox spun around, revealing clear panic for the first time. Davidson wiped his forehead with a handkerchief, sweat pouring like a man about to face the bench. And then, from the end of the road, a sound quieter but more terrifying than any siren echoed. A low hum of a black SUV engine. No sirens, no urgency, yet gliding forward like a verdict. Two black Chevrolet Suburbans from Atlanta's Department of Internal Affairs entered the park. Windows tinted like mirrors, plates without patrol codes. No one had to ask who they were. The entire park seemed to feel it. Behind those windows, the system was waking up. And for Kerenza, in that moment, for the first time all day, the wind stopped blowing against her. Not because she was safe, but because she knew the battle had begun. The first black SUV stopped at the park's curb, its tires hissing slightly on the asphalt, like a silent exclamation mark. The door opened. No sirens, no loudspeakers, no flashing lights. Only the presence of a man who seemed to vacuum the air from the space around him. Deputy Chief Raymond Carter, a black man, 6'2", over 30 years in the force, a survivor of the 1992 Atlanta riots, and respected even within police precincts rife with bias, stepped out of the vehicle. His polished black shoes tapped against the gravel like war drums, heralding a battle fought without weapons. His presence required no introduction. With a straight-backed walk and eyes sharp as blades, Carter moved directly toward the circle forming around Felix Maddox and Linus Davidson. The crowd parted for him like the sea before Moses. Phones instantly shifted to film him. No one wanted to miss this moment. The moment when a man in uniform ordered others in the same uniform to bow their heads. Carter stopped at the very center of the circle, his gaze locked on Maddox, as if to pierce through the thick skin of arrogance. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. "Felix Maddox, Linus Davidson, surrender your weapons. Remove your badges. Await internal affairs investigation. Effective immediately." Silence. For a moment, Felix Maddox thought he had misheard. His mouth opened, but no words came out. His previously flushed face was now pale as chalk. Linus Davidson swayed, grabbing onto a nearby lamppost to avoid collapsing. Sweat poured from his temple down his chin like someone had splashed ice water into his awareness. And in the middle of that circle, where power, truth, and justice collided, Kerenza Blake still stood tall. Her posture remained unchanged from beginning to end. No tears, no triumphant expression. Only eyes heavy with the weariness carried by generations of black women before her. But this time, she wasn't standing in the shadows. She stood at the center of a city's gaze. A round of applause broke out. No words spoken, but the claps said enough. We saw it. At last, justice wasn't strangled into silence. In Kerenza's hand, the phone call remained active. On the other end, Mayor Knox Blake's voice came through steady, like embers smoldering beneath a layer of ash. Don't let them leave. Internal Affairs and the legal team are on their way. Preserve the scene. Record everything. Kerenza didn't need to respond, because in that very moment, Maddox, the man who had used a baton to lift her dress, suddenly dropped to one knee. He didn't scream. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He just whispered, almost whimpering, "I didn't know you were the mayor's daughter. I have a wife. I have kids." Kerenza turned, locking eyes with him. For the first time, she answered him, slowly, each word slicing through the air. "That's exactly the problem. You thought I was no one. So you believed I didn't deserve respect." As Raymond Carter stepped forward, handcuffs already in hand, Maddox didn't resist. Davidson all but surrendered, letting his arms be pulled behind his back. And for the first time that afternoon, the witnesses didn't shout, didn't clap. They just held their breath. Not out of fear, but because the power they once doubted was now, finally, doing what was right. A female attorney from the Internal Affairs Unit, about 40 years old, cropped hair, name tag reading A. Whitman, stepped beside Carter, staring hard at Felix Maddox. Then she spoke quietly, but knew for many to hear. If a cop dares to do this in broad daylight, in a public park, in front of civilians, then imagine what they'd do back at the station, where no one's filming. That sentence pierced straight to the root of the problem, and Jefferson Park, once as peaceful as a late afternoon poem, had now become a battlefield where truth could no longer be ignored. And at the center of it all, Kerenza Blake was no longer just the girl in the yellow dress. She was the first spark that would set an entire city ablaze. The moment the call ended, Knox Blake stood motionless in the press briefing room on the 19th floor of Atlanta City Hall. Behind him, reporters still waited for the weekly economic announcement. The projector screen still displayed the words, "Atlanta, Sustainable Infrastructure Redevelopment, Plan to 2030. But his face, usually radiating the calm of a seasoned politician, now looked like a frozen lake, cold, flat, and ready to shatter under the slightest blow. Without a word, he unclipped the mic from his lapel and turned away from the podium. His advisors exchanged bewildered looks. A young assistant called out, "Mr. Mayor, is something wrong?" Knox didn't answer. He walked straight to his private office, the glass door shutting behind him like thunder without warning. He opened a drawer and pulled out a red-edged phone, the kind reserved only for city-level emergencies. Terrorism, mass shootings, major infrastructure failures. His hand didn't tremble, but his eyes had changed color. 3 seconds later, the line picked up. "Commissioner Hayes here." "Shut up, Hayes." Knox's voice slashed through the air like a blade. "2 of your officers just pulled up my daughter's dress, in the middle of a park, in broad daylight, in front of civilians. I didn't know. I didn't call for promises." His voice was granite cold. "I called to issue orders. Suspend Felix Maddox and Linus Davidson immediately. I want Internal Affairs at Jefferson Park within 60 minutes. If I don't have written confirmation by 4 p.m. today, I'll take this entire incident to the national press. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox if I have to. Don't test me. Hayes went silent. Knox hung up. No room for defense. He turned to his desk and dialed a direct number for Chief Inspector Kenneth Boone, whom he'd once appointed with a promise to change the culture from within. I need the truth, Ken. Why does Maddox, 3 sexual misconduct complaints, 2 ethical warnings, 1 incident of threatening an unarmed civilian, still have a badge? Silence on the other end. Then Boone's voice came, raspy as though something had lodged in his throat. Mr. Mayor, I didn't realize it had gotten this bad. It's been bad for a long time, but you weren't looking. And today, you didn't see a file. You saw my daughter, her dress lifted in public. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Blake ended the call. He pressed the red button on the intercom system, his voice echoing through the floor. Call an emergency meeting. Full legal advisory team, administrative investigations, city HR director, and a representative from the state DOJ. Starts in 25 minutes by 3:20 p.m. The main conference room on the 21st floor was filled. 7 people sat along the dark mahogany oval table, each having read the preliminary incident report, compiled by his legal aid from the scene. Video clips, witness statements, live streams, and Kerenza's short voice recording. No one joked. No one checked their phones. Blake stood, his eyes sweeping across the room. We're not just cutting out 2 bad apples. We're uprooting the entire rotten field. From now until next week, I want the following steps. A full audit of all internal complaints filed since 2013, especially those internally resolved. Establish a special review unit for all park patrol officers, starting with the Jefferson sector, and reviewing recruitment files back to 2015. Emergency funding to Safer Atlanta, founded by Kerenza, supporting victims of police discrimination, to launch a hotline and legal aid network. Temporary suspension of any unit with unresolved misconduct claims, cases to be forwarded to the city's Civilian Oversight Commission. Form an ethics rapid response force, including citizens, attorneys, and psychologists, to randomly monitor patrol conduct. An advisor spoke hesitantly. And media strategy, sir? Knox Blake replied, eyes still fixed on the operations chart on the wall. We don't control the media. We control our actions, and our actions will speak louder than any press release. He turned back, his voice lowering like embers burning deep beneath the earth. I'm not demanding justice for my daughter. I'm demanding justice for every black woman who's ever been mocked, trampled, and forced into silence, just because she didn't have Blake at the end of her name. In that room full of power, everyone understood. Atlanta would never be the same again. And a political storm, not born of partisanship, but of righteous fury, was rising. Less than 8 hours after Felix Maddox's baton touched the hem of Kerenza Blake's dress, America reacted as if a crack, decades in the making, had finally split wide open. And the first fracture didn't spread through cable television or major news outlets. It came from a 37-second iPhone video shot by a 17-year-old Latino teen named Emilio Vargas, living in East Atlanta. The video began with a shaky frame as Emilio biked, then came to an abrupt stop at the sound of a scream. In the 5th frame, Kerenza's yellow dress is lifted. By the 12th second, people nearby began to turn, their eyes filled with shock. And by the 33rd second, a woman in scrubs charged into the frame, pointing and shouting, "That's assault!" Emilio uploaded the clip to TikTok with the caption, "If this happened to the mayor's daughter, imagine what happens to girls with no last name." Within 8 hours, the video hit 1.8 million views, was shared by over 340,000 accounts, and reached the top trending spot on Twitter with the hashtag #JusticeForKerenza. On Instagram, stories began to circulate showing the yellow dress embroidered with the words, "I see you." TikTok turned the incident into the biggest political flashpoint of the month, surpassing even the Florida primaries and debates over welfare legislation. Influencers with millions of followers, from black artists and lawyers to LGBTQ+ activists, began calling for accountability and punishment for Felix Maddox and Linus Davidson. 3 hours later, CNN, MSNBC, and BET simultaneously interrupted their regular broadcasts to deliver breaking news live from Atlanta City Hall. A veteran CNN commentator exclaimed during the segment, "This isn't just an assault. This is a microcosm of an entire system that disrespects the bodies of women of color." The shockwaves spread. In Chicago, students from Northwestern University held a protest outside the 5th District Police Department. In Oakland, nearly 500 people gathered in Oscar Grant Plaza, holding signs that read, "I am Kerenza." In Harlem, a group of street artists completed a massive mural of her on the old wall behind the 125th Street station, her eyes staring directly down the tracks, with the words painted beneath in white, "She stood." "So we rise." A 65-year-old woman in the Bronx, Mrs. Celestine Rogers, broke down in tears during an interview with CBS New York. "I saw myself at 20 years old in that girl's eyes. The only difference is, when it happened to me, no one filmed it. No one believed me." The National Human Rights Commission issued an official statement the following morning, calling the incident a systemic illustration of racism and misogyny embedded within the structure of American law enforcement. The report also cited data from the past 5 years, revealing that 86% of harassment complaints against police were not fully investigated, especially when the victims were women of color or transgender individuals. Human Rights Watch took it further. They decided to include the video of Maddox lifting Kerenza's dress as required material in their upcoming ethics and civil rights training across 19 states starting this fall. A caption below the video read, "This isn't just wrong. It's abuse of power, shameless, and community-destroying." Kerenza herself had yet to issue any official statement. She hadn't posted on social media, nor released a comment through legal representation. But the image of her in that yellow dress, feet firmly planted on the gravel of Jefferson Park, eyes steady before the crowd, had already spread beyond anyone's ability to contain. She hadn't spoken, but she had been heard. And the yellow dress? It was no longer just an outfit. It had become a symbol. Like Rosa Parks' coat, Angela Davis's silk scarf, or the "I am a man" sign from the 1968 Memphis movement. The yellow dress had been printed on T-shirts, painted on graffiti walls, and hung from university balconies. Across social media, people now call it the dress that defied silence. In a lecture hall at Yale University, Professor Monica Devereaux, an expert in constitutional law and gender, began her class with a single line projected on the screen. Today's lesson, the Kerenza Blake case and bodily autonomy in public space. Atlanta was no longer the only place feeling the aftershock. America was trembling. And this time, it wasn't because of gunfire, but because one girl stood tall in a yellow dress and refused to disappear. On October 17th, the Fulton County Supreme Court opened earlier than usual. The long hallway leading to courtroom 3 was already packed by 6 a.m. Not because of a murder trial, nor a multi-million-dollar banking scandal, but because of a hearing hailed as the civil rights milestone of the 21st century. At the entrance, reporters from CNN, the New York Times, and The Root stood shoulder to shoulder with sharply dressed law students, black mothers who had once filed complaints against the police and received no response, and elderly visitors from South Carolina who came solely to witness a trial where black people didn't have to bow their heads. In the front row, Kerenza Blake sat upright, She wore a plain, long-sleeved black dress, no patterns, no accessories, as if declaring something through simplicity. Her eyes were fixed ahead, where Maddox and Davidson were being escorted in by 2 internal affairs officers. No hatred, no trembling. Only one thing was present in her gaze: unyielding resolve. Felix Maddox wore a white dress shirt, stripped of both badge and firearm. His face was pale. Linus Davidson, younger, still couldn't lift his head. He clenched his hand so tightly his knuckles turned white, as if praying for something that no longer existed. Prosecutor Ila Pierce, a woman of Ethiopian descent, previously honored by the Lawyers' Alliance for Justice, rose to deliver the charges. Her voice rang out with clarity, each word like a deliberately placed stone. Felix Maddox is charged with 6 counts, including sexual assault, abuse of power, violation of civil rights, misconduct in public office, witness intimidation, and systemic racial discrimination. Linus Davidson is charged as an accomplice for aiding in the cover-up of a crime and for failure to intervene in unlawful conduct. The courtroom held its breath as a 40-second video, the unedited original, played on the large screen. Each frame was crystal clear: the willow tree, the yellow dress, the blow, the scream, the laughter, and the horrified faces. No one moved. No one breathed. A female student in the 3rd row broke into sobs. A retired nurse raised her hand to cover her face. The judge tapped his gavel lightly to maintain order, but even he could not hide his reddened eyes. When the video ended, Ila Pierce spoke plainly, devoid of emotion. They didn't see her as a human being. To them, Kerenza Blake was just 3 things: black, a woman, and an open target for their perverse display of power. Maddox bowed his head, hands clutching his pant legs. No plea, no tears. Davidson began to cry, his lips trembling. Some claimed he murmured, "Please, forgive me." But no one was certain. Kerenza didn't need to say a word. Her presence was the strongest indictment. No dramatization, no fragility. Her composure, in the eyes of the public, resembled the silence of a monument. Quiet, unshakable, and eternally present. The 12-member jury, diverse in race and background, took less than 42 minutes to reach a verdict. According to Chief Judge Malcolm Reddick, it was the shortest deliberation ever recorded for a case with more than 5 felony charges. When the jury returned, the foreperson stood. We find both defendants, Felix Maddox and Linus Davidson, guilty on all counts. No cheers. No applause. Because this wasn't a victory. It was the final acknowledgement of truth. And when the judge announced that Maddox would be held without bail pending formal sentencing, and Davidson would be detained for evidence tampering, the courtroom remained silent. Yet within that silence was the low, rumbling roar of a justice system that had, for too long, only dared to whisper. Today, justice did not arrive in a white robe, holding the scales of fairness. It came in the form of a black woman standing firm in the eye of a storm and refusing to step back. 4 weeks after the conclusion of the historic trial, the final verdict was delivered beneath the ancient dome of the Fulton County Supreme Court. That day, the skies over Atlanta were heavy and gray, as if nature itself was holding its breath in anticipation. The entire nation watched. And then, each word dropped into the room like a knock on the long-shut gates of justice. Felix Maddox was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison, with no parole permitted during the first 5 years. The judge made it clear: your crimes were not just against an individual, but against the moral foundation of law enforcement. Linus Davidson received a 3-year prison sentence, along with 5 years of probation, during which he is prohibited from returning to any form of law enforcement, in any state. The federal mandate specified barred from all positions in law enforcement, including consulting, private security, or internal training. Both were stripped of their pensions, retirement insurance, and added to the Permanent Disqualification Registry, a newly established database by the Department of Justice designed to prevent the recycling of disgraced officers from one state to another. No more getting fired in Georgia and hired in Florida or Texas months later. No one gets to be forgotten anymore. As she stepped out of the courthouse gates, Kerenza Blake did not bow her head, nor chant any slogans. Her face didn't beam with triumph, but her gaze was carved in quiet stone, steady, unwavering, and resolute. A BBC reporter approached and asked, "If you could say one sentence to Felix Maddox, what would it be?" Kerenza didn't hesitate. "You didn't just lift my skirt. You lifted the mask off the entire system." The media paused for a beat, not from shock, but because they understood that nothing else needed to be said. On the courthouse steps, over 300 people dressed in yellow dresses were already gathered. They didn't shout. They didn't wave banners. They simply stood as an impenetrable circle, waiting to greet the woman who had turned a personal violation into a collective reckoning. A 12-year-old girl with braided pigtails and a pale yellow hoodie stepped forward and handed Kerenza a messy crayon drawing. In the picture was a long bench under a willow tree with a childlike caption, "You made the park bench safe again." Kerenza knelt, hugged the girl, and kissed her cheek. A small moment, but one that went viral on social media, gaining over 9.3 million views within 48 hours. A middle-aged Asian woman, tearful, took Kerenza's hand and said, "I stayed silent for 27 years. Today, I'm going to tell my daughter what I went through." A few hours later, the eastern bench section of Jefferson Park was officially renamed the Golden Zone of Justice, marked by a bronze plaque that read, "Here, a skirt was lifted, and truth stood up." People no longer come to the park to grieve. They come to remember, to honor an afternoon that was laid bare and a rise no one saw coming. Beneath the rustling willow trees, along the brick path that once bore witness to humiliation, there are now light, unburdened footsteps. Children run again, women sit reading, elders stroll, all of it in quiet but sacred defiance, declaring, this place belongs to them, not to those who wear badges and mistake themselves for the law. And in each of those footsteps, there echoes a story, not only of reckoning, but also an answer to every person who has ever asked, does justice truly exist? And Kerenza, without uttering a word, answered for an entire generation. On a quiet autumn afternoon, golden leaves fell evenly across the stone steps, leading into Jefferson Park. The air in Atlanta was cool, no longer carrying the stifling heat of the day. Kerenza was humiliated in broad daylight. And now, after all the upheaval, after the trial, after the sentences, after millions of shares, she returned. The old bench was still there, resting beneath the willow tree that had witnessed everything. The tree still whispered, as if it had never been silent. Kerenza sat down for the first time since that day. No more cameras, no more angry crowds, no more police, no more screaming voices. Just the wind, and the only man who had stood behind her since the day she was born, Mayor Knox Blake. He sat beside his daughter, saying nothing. He didn't need to speak. His calloused hands, which once signed budget cuts to dismantle injustice, now rested gently on her shoulder, a presence that required no words. "This place," he said after a long silence. "We used to sit here when I was still a city councilman, dreaming of becoming mayor. I told you justice doesn't come from titles, but from persistence. He turned to look at Kerenza, his eyes glistening. And now, you've reclaimed not just your voice, but the whole narrative. Kerenza gently squeezed her father's hand. She pressed her lips together, her throat tightening, then softly said, "But I still see it. Still see myself, skirt ripped up in the light, in front of everyone." Her voice wasn't weak. It was real. And the truth always carries pain. Knox Blake took both her hands, his trembling out of anger and faith. "They used to think no one would believe us, but now they're afraid. Not because you're the mayor's daughter, but because you dared not stay silent." Kerenza took a deep breath. She looked up, sunlight filtering through the leaves like golden threads. Everything fell silent until the sound of footsteps approached from a distance. At first, just a few, then dozens, then hundreds. Slow, steady steps, bringing no slogans, no banners. They came, young, old, black, white, Latinx, Asian, Muslim, disabled, survivors, the forgotten. It wasn't a protest. This was a living memorial. A middle-aged brown-skinned woman knelt before Kerenza and handed her a photo. In it was a little girl with curly hair, hugging a teddy bear, eyes that had once known fear. "Because of you," the woman whispered. "I told my husband what happened to me when I was 14. And I've been living truthfully ever since." A 10-year-old boy in a yellow shirt that read, "Let us be seen," stepped forward and gave Kerenza a handmade bracelet. "My mom says you're the one who turned fear into law." And in that moment, Kerenza lifted her head. The wind brushed her hair gently past her shoulder. No more tears, no more trembling. Just a gaze, deep, bright, and undeniable. The bench that once bore witness to humiliation was now the seat of rebirth. The yellow dress, no longer a symbol of trauma, was now a banner of dignity. That evening, on the stage at Spelman College, where Kerenza was invited to speak before more than 1,200 students, she ended her speech with the words, now etched into the stone plaque at the park. "My story doesn't end here. It starts here. And from this day on, we do not bow our heads." Below, the entire auditorium rose, a wave of raised hands, not in celebration, but in silent oath. For justice is never a conclusion, for every woman ever shamed, for every person of color ever doubted, and for every park that once buried fear, now the place where a whole generation rises. Legacy is not held in victory. It lives in what no one can take away, a story that never ends. Finally, something has begun to change. Join us in sharing powerful stories by hitting like and subscribing. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and genuine empathy.